Hello, I'm Alejandra Boyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Programs and Partnerships at Seattle Opera. I am so delighted to be facilitating today's conversation, Casting Change, and I am joined by incredible colleagues, artist humans, to share our vision of an equitable opera world. Before I introduce the panelists, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that I am joining today's conference from the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish, past and present, who remain stewards of the land in which I now call Seattle. Over the next hour, we will be going to dig into a conversation about the challenges of achieving equity in opera and what it will take to create a more just and equitable future. I am joined by 4 incredible artists. Their bios are at the bottom of the page for you, so I'm not going to dig in too much and just introduce them by quick title and name. So we have Bass-Baritone Davóne Tines, Soprano Raquel Gonzalez, Yuval Sharon, Artistic Director for the Industry in LA and Michigan Opera Theater, and Soprano Julia Bullock. Each of these talented individuals have been strong advocates for equity in opera and the advancement of our art form. So welcome. Thank you for joining me. As we go through our conversation, I want to invite the audience to pop in any questions in the Q&A chat that you have on the side of your screen, and we'll address them as we go, or we'll be sure to cover as many of them as we can towards the end of our time together. Throughout this conference, we have had the opportunity to hear from arts leaders across multiple disciplines talk about equity, specifically racial equity, and issues of diversity and inclusion in the arts. And I believe that this is the first opera-specific panel, which is pretty exciting. To begin our conversation today, I was struck by a question that Julia posed as we were planning this, around what is the vision, right? What is the vision of opera for the future, and what does that really mean? So I want to start off our conversation, and Davóne, I'd like for you to kick this off for us, is what is your vision of an equitable opera industry?
I think the vision of an equitable opera industry has to be in line with the vision that many people find for humanity in general, or the country in general, which is to hopefully move to some idea of freedom or some idea of acceptance of different realities and identities and existences. Specific to opera, though, I've continued to be inspired by my colleague Julia Bullock's, wanting to get back to a deeper or older definition of opera, meaning work from the Italian word, or also the idea of bringing different things together to tell a story and bringing those things together through effort. I think it could potentially reframe what we think of as this medium, but more importantly, to bring to maybe a closer truth the idea that this is about storytelling, and it's about storytelling for everyone, for people. My vision then, I guess, could be summed up as a medium that actually involves all of us, but I feel we're quite far away from something like that.
Yeah, and we'll dig into that part of it. But I love that you called out going back, right, to the original idea, because that that to me is sometimes the problem of what people see as the original intent of opera, right? So I love that you actually harken it back to work and bringing all of these pieces together to make a work. Raquel, would love to hear from you about your vision.
Yeah, I think that's what Davóne said. I think is definitely the direction we should be heading in, of, talking about why opera was relevant when it was first created was because it spoke directly to the experiences of the people in the audience and the people on stage. And I think that's a direction that we should head in, and trying to make sure that there is art that represents the people who are sharing it and who we want to bring into the audiences. I also have the struggle that now I feel like BIPOC artists are kind of tasked with the burden of, only sharing the stories. And what personally drew me to opera, and I don't know for the rest of the artists here if it's the same, but was the idea of escapism and that kind of fantastical aspect to the art that now, for a lot of us, we don't get to partake in as well, because now it is our responsibility, a chance, but also responsibility to share, our stories and our histories. And suddenly the opera stage is, burdened. And, to an extent it should be. Of course, I think it should be a place where we go to examine, to put a mirror up to our culture. But also I think that in tasking our artists and our creators with, sharing our history and the burden of our history on stage, that we're also stealing from ourselves the opportunity to partake in what drew us to the art. So it's a multi-layered conversation, right? But I don't know, both creating art that is representative but gives artists the chance to create and fantasize as we originally dreamed of, I think.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So if, correct me if I'm yeah, no, go ahead, Julia, go on.
No, Raquel, I love what you're saying. It's just about allowing artists to envision, fantasize, because I guess the vision that I have for opera now, or at least my involvement in it, is a space and an environment and culture where artists feel free, but also like are centered and valued, like and that their worth is not totally hinged upon what they offer in their bodies, what they represent on their bodies, and then the risk of being exploited then sort of starts to dissolve, right? And so this, I mean, issues around like exoticism and objectification and exploitation have always been of great issue for every single performer and creative human being on the planet. But if we are going to continue to ask any individual to come and watch and engage with this art form, there has to be a like legitimate celebration of human life and the extent of it, and not allowing that to be limited in any way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for adding to that, Julia. Yuval, we'll have you wrap up with your, or just wrap up this section with your vision of opera.
Sure. Well, wow. I'm just so honored to be on this panel with three artists that I just respect so very much. And thank you so much for hosting this to the Sphinx. It's great to be here and talk about this. I guess I think that when I think about what a vision for opera is, the way that I think about it is, wouldn't it be great if opera felt like it was coming from the streets up, as opposed to being administered from the top down? I think in a way that encapsulates a lot of what a lot of the conversations we've been having this past year about equity, about diversity, about who's telling whose story, which stories really we need to be telling, which stories are opera particularly strong at telling for whatever reason. And Raquel, I just might want to just say that I love what you were saying about trying to find this balance between making sure that our ideas of representation and the stories that we tell on the operatic stage nevertheless share space with the realm of the imaginative, and the realm of magic. I would only add to that even that realm of magic can be looked at with a critical gaze that makes sure that even these imaginative images and sounds and language that we're delivering to this audience can nevertheless give the audience the tools to grow and to be better and to be more empathetic and to be richer in their understanding of the world. So I kind of feel like I'm totally with you, but I'd also like to see a kind of yes and to that kind of approach.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's exactly, I hope for a world where right now, you know, a lot of the new work that is being created is telling the stories of what is happening right now to Black people in our country, to immigrants from Mexico, you know, and that it is art that needs to be created right now and needs to be shared right now. And I agree that I hope that it paves the path to where the stories that we get to tell and where we get to, and that we get to create aren't just about the heavy weight that a lot of our cultures carry, and that it does pave the path for you know, creating art that magnifies and allows Black people and Latin people and Indigenous people in this country to dream of what may be, in the same way that we've allowed, and the same way that European art has done for centuries now. So I think we're both on the same page that the art that is being created right now hopefully paves the path for you know, what develops down the road.
And I'd venture to add that magic that maybe Raquel is talking about provides the possibility for what Julia is pointing out about a legit celebration of human life. And I think that can be found maybe even in parts of the existing canon, but as long as those things are interrogated honestly. I think we're past a point where things can just exist in a space because they're beautiful or we think they should. I mean, why do we look at a Rigoletto and not talk about mob violence against disabled or even rape? You know, those things are all there. The human story is there, but there's a disconnection between why we're telling this story and who's even watching it. There's a line of connection between all of these things. And the magic that's possible is the magic of allowing people to sit in that reality and feel how they respond to it. And for us as artists to also feel how we feel in those situations and share our experience through them. There's possibility for that in the canon, but very often those connections are not drawn out or even seen as valuable.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of what I'm hearing you all mention. Oh, go ahead, Julia, go. I told for the attendees, I told everyone I wanted them to interrupt each other, so they are doing it. Go on, Julia, and then Yuval.
Well, why are we so insistent on returning to certain kinds of stories again and again? What is it about the importance of, just certain tales, certain circumstances, certain oppressive practices and societal systemic F-ups? Like, why do we have to continue addressing them over and over and over again? And it's because we need reminders of them over and over and over again in order to, I guess, continue making adjustments. And so that line of inquiry, that very serious line of inquiry, and putting the work itself into context and actually bringing up the importance of all of the underscoring of these works, new or repeated, that has to be done very seriously. And it needs to be brought to the forefront in a bright and vital way. Otherwise, we are just running around in circles, repeating things for what purpose and for whom. I just echoing what I'm hearing, and also my frustrations, honestly, when those steps to contextualize the work, to
Okay, I think Julie's having slight connectivity issues as she's calling us from Amsterdam. But as we, don't worry, Julia, you're back, jump in. Otherwise, Yuval, why don't you share your thought there, and then she can interrupt you.
Julia, if you're back, you can, I don't want to.
I am back. I'm sorry. I don't want to, where did I cut off?
In a really great pose. It was really cool. It was like you were like but,
well, you were asking about, thinking about who is this for, right? And who are we making this the art form, and really critically thinking through that, interrogating. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the word. Yeah.
I guess all I just want to say is what, it's just very irritating when the interrogation is not done seriously, when the inquiry is not done seriously, and the contextualization is not taken super seriously. I simply don't understand why it is not, when that is usually like the root of why the work was created in the first damn place.
Right.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that to just say, yes, such a great point. And actually, in so many ways, this is why I got into directing, because I think that in a way, I mean, I think it's everyone's responsibility, but in a way, I think the director leads that charge of inquiry and sort of states what are, when we redo a classic piece, why are we redoing it? What are we going to kind of shove under the rug, or what are we going to expose in the kind of bright light that Julia mentioned? And I just want to say that I think it's so important what Davóne was saying, this notion that when pieces are presented in this rote way, in this kind of knee-jerk way, not just visually, but also in terms of the acting, in terms of every aspect of the live performance, when it isn't the result of that investigation, there are certain mindsets that get a subliminal pass, to the audience. So when we do Magic Flute and we just let Monostatos sing, "Well, I'm ugly because I'm black," that means a white supremacist sitting in the audience there feels seen. When we do La Traviata and there's just a feeling like, well, of course she should give up. Of course she should give up her happiness for the happiness of this aristocratic family. A misogynist feels seen. But it's very simple, I think, to just look at it with a fresh eye and do it together as an ensemble and say, we have the ability to retell the story. And that's where I think opera's power really resides, and where the potential for opera is so great, because we're not talking about a statue that needs to be torn down. We're talking about an open work that involves our active interpretation. And with that active interpretation, I think we can get to something so much deeper than that surface. We can actually expose the racism and hypocrisy of the days of Mozart's days and Verdi's days, but we can also maybe get to the humanity that I think they were really after. I mean, Magic Flute's also such an amazing story of overcoming prejudice if it's presented that way. Yeah. If everybody is on board to present it that way, but it's not going to be done by not getting your hands dirty and not actually spotlighting that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also say, Yuval, to your example around Monostatos and Traviata, for me, it's not even so much as that white supremacist or that misogynist felt seen. It's that we allowed the entire audience to feel comfort in that norm, right? So we are then we're just completing the cycle that we've been stuck in. We are complicit in just allowing these dominant norms to stay dominant because we're not doing our work to point to interrogate and be really intentional, right? So things that I'm hearing and what y'all are saying is being really intentional about the art that we're making. Sorry, my earphone's falling out here. And there's a lot of talk, at least I'm hearing it this way, and tell me if I'm wrong, around, opera as a form of liberation. And we've really lost sight of that, right? It can be a space for liberation. And I think of the work of Dr. Naomi Andre, where she talks about this professor at University of Michigan and scholar in residence at Seattle Opera. But she talks about, it can be a transformative art form that allows for a place of liberation, and I feel like I'm hearing that in what you all are saying about certainly in Raquel's statements around artists being able to do the art that they wanted to do, and Julia as well, and exploring that. So we've spent some time here talking about our vision and starting to dig in a little to some of the issues. So let's veer in that direction. If we are all here saying, there is a problem, there is a better, brighter future, how do we disrupt this model? How do we disrupt our current model of creating, presenting opera that's really rooted in a European model to create something that reflects our society, reflects our cultures? And I say that with a pause because our culture is so nuanced, and it is not a monolith. Even within the Latin culture, there's a lot of variance. Within Black Indigenous cultures, there's a lot of variance. So how do we then start to disrupt the current state of being for opera to be able to lead us in this direction? And Julia, I'd love to start with you to get some of your thoughts about how we can do that, or how you've been able to do that, or have seen others start to do that.
Sure. I mean, I think some of how that has happened is just, well, yeah, I'll just speak from a personal place. I think for the projects that I have originated or envisioned, oftentimes they've come out of my own finances. I've just commissioned them, paid for them myself. And they, of course, then led to other opportunities or an evolution of the work itself, which has been very exciting, or they've provided space for me to then give space for other artists to create their own work and to share it. So I hope me saying this is not coming from a place of just my pure ego, but again, this kind of just gets back to this idea of really trusting the intuition and vision of the human beings who are offering the art, who are making the art and creating something, and allowing them to see a project through to the end, and to stay fully involved, and to have agency in the creation of a work. Yeah, and yeah, besides, yeah, I don't need to get into all the.
No, that's great. And actually, you heard that echoed in.
Maybe Yuval can speak to the misuse of funds in organizations.
You brought a good point that was echoed in a previous session. Yeah, there was a session for arts administrators, and basically that question came up, and one of the panelists, forgive me, I can't recall who it was, said, don't ask for permission, do the work yourself, and they spoke about how they just started their own organizations using their own money and to do their own work. Davóne and then Yuval, you both if you want to jump in here.
I completely agree with the idea. Don't ask for permission, do things yourself. And very much like Julia, at least for me, some of the most personally rewarding things have been things that I've been able to initiate myself in terms of as response to what's there. If there's a story that you want to tell and there isn't a conduit to do it, then the task of finding a composer who is along the same lines, or working on, the building of a narrative over years even. And it's a blessing and a privilege to be able to do that and to be able to galvanize things that way. And I think on the other side, though, is a change or a shift within institutions to invite artists to do this sort of thing. Yes, there are some of us that have found ways to do it and figure it out, but why isn't there a conversation about why someone is connecting to the piece that they're making? Yes, amazing directors like Yuval and others that are very special and out there, make rehearsal spaces that are about this connection and interrogation. But I feel largely that institutions are not positioning artists at the center and saying, okay, we want this person to embody this space and this role, but we're not going to talk about what that artist wants to say through that, needs to say through that. Is it just that the voice aligns or how the person looks aligns, but there's a person in there and that person connects to the person they're trying to portray. And so moving a little more to the institutional side, in terms of how to disrupt or how to move things to a certain place, I think change resides where power resides, and power resides where money resides, and the money with organizations resides with the board, ultimately. that is the entity that is the inroads or the buck stops here in terms of, how the mission of an organization gets realized. And one thing I've realized through some of the work I've been up to in quarantine, you can sit down and look at things and have more time to do it, is mission statements of various organizations. And it's a little wild how obtuse some of these statements are. They're very exceptional, they're very sensational. We are here to uphold the highest quality of music at every turn. Who's deciding what quality is, and who's deciding what music is? And at the end of the day, is the board even empowered to make their work about realizing that mission? That mission has to get clear, but the change has to happen at who has the ultimate power. And it also, I think, puts administrators in a really hard spot, artistic administrators and executive directors who are on one end trying to do their art of curation and do their art of, allowing space and support for other people, but on the other hand are beholden to people whose perspective on the world is perhaps quite removed from the streets, as you've all mentioned. To be pretty frank, a lot like a smallish 10 to 50 billionaires or 100 millionaires probably don't know what's going to speak to the broader public. So in order for there to be disruption from the core outward, those people have to acknowledge that perhaps they don't know everything about what needs to be told, and thus cede that power to the artists that they're, I guess, in a word, trusting, but not fully.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a complicated point. Go ahead, Raquel.
Oh, I was just going to say that Davóne hit on a lot of what I thought of when he posed this question, is that, in America, we are so, rightfully obsessed with the fragility of opera in our institutions here, because they are, at the end of the day, businesses, and the people at the top are concerned about, the bottom line and the money, and and they can't figure out a way, because they don't trust that there is a way within their own communities and within the artists to tell stories that will bring in people who want to hear these stories and will give light and life to these stories. And I think it's exactly what Davóne said. And I, when you've all mentioned that it should, opera stems from the streets, it's hard when you, exactly as Davóne said, when you look at the board, when you look at the top, and it is completely unrepresentative of the communities in which these companies exist. And, I'm not an administrator or a board member, so I can't talk to the intricacies of what it is like to try to create an opera in a community from which you are so removed. But I think the change does have to start at the top, and if the boards and administrations are not going to change, then encouraging them to listen and look and trust that the communities in which they exist do want to listen to their own stories being told and want to see their community on stage as well. Yeah, I think Davóne hit on it when he mentioned that it stems from trusting the artists.
Yeah. Well, and from the administrator perspective, it's trusting the artist and trusting your community. Boards and leadership in organizations can claim that others are wrong, but it'll show when your bottom line is continuously red, right? It'll show when people stop coming into your theater. And so there is I don't know, for me, there is no reason why we're not doing it, right? There is no reason why we're not already thinking in this way, already programming in a way that ensures that we are responding to the needs of our community, the requests of our community, works that reflect and speak to the folks in our areas, and stop looking at it as a risk, right? I think that also is something that really keeps people, oh, it's too risky, right? We've said this about new works for like years. Oh, it's too risky, people won't come, it's just too hard. And I mean, Yuval, you're an artistic director for both the industry and Michigan Opera Theater, two different companies, right, in certain ways, but both are opera companies. I mean, for you, how do you look at this issue of the administration side of this?
Yeah, wow. I mean, Raquel, Devon, Julia, those were such amazing comments, and I have so many responses to that. To me, honestly, if I had to boil it down to one response, I would just say the dearth of courage. There's just not a lot of courage in our field. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's true. There is just, that feeling of, I'm going to advocate for this. I know it's going to be hard. I know I'm going to have to convince some people who think of opera as an affirmation of the world as they want to see it, not as a disruption of that preconceived idea. But I think with the right advocates for that, I think everyone can be awakened again to a sense of curiosity about the world, or I think that we have to remember that of course it's a business, but we are mission driven, and we have a responsibility to the development of our communities. And that goes beyond looking at the bottom line. You cannot be driven only by the bottom line. You have to actually be driven by the mission. That's part of what it means to be a nonprofit.
And the mission has to be good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the mission has to feel like it resonates with where. This is something else I wanted to say in terms of a vision for opera. It's like we always think of opera in very universal terms, and like it goes back to all of the difficulties of universal standards of this is what a great Wagner singer sounds like. This is what a great, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 19th century French repertoire always needs this kind of thing, And I don't know. I think the way that we know political action works is you think globally, but you act locally. And I want our companies to think super locally. Local artists, local. I'm thinking about this a lot with Detroit. Sorry, Julia, what were you going to say?
No, just 100%. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll just say that. I mean, with Detroit, what's so fascinating to me about Detroit is, of course, the opera's 50-year history, but I'm also thinking about the incredible musical strands that have made up Detroit. Motown and techno and jazz, and it's been such an incredible crossroads of artistic creation, and I'm not sure why I just can't see an opera company continuing now to just keep doing Verdi, Puccini, Mozart, with as if it's in a vacuum, with no influence of all the rest of those incredible artists that are people come into the opera house, not suddenly going into some zone, some sort of twilight zone that has no reference to where they live in, and they bring all of their concerns from the street, from their lives, into the opera house with them. And if that's not reflected, and there's so many ways for that to be reflected, but if that's not reflected, you can't blame people when they think opera is an obsolete art form.
Absolutely. So far as you all have been talking, some of the things that have popped out about how do we not start, because that's wrong. I mean, a lot of folks have been working towards this change, right? So it's wrong to say, how do we start? But for some folks who might be listening, they're thinking, oh my gosh, how do I start this, right? So there's a lot around intentionality, right? Being really intentional about why are you making this art? What is it that you want to say, and for whom? Yuval, I love your point here around courage. I am 100% with you. I think there is not enough courage. And I'll wearing my arts administrator hat, I think the biggest area where we lack that is within the administrators. And that's to say, in generous spirit to my fellow administrators, does not say that there's not enough courage out there, but it's there is a gatekeeping that doesn't always allow for maybe the folks who are ready to take on the challenge to come through the top to be able to do that, right? So I want to really call that out to you, because there's a lot of really passionate and brave people out there, and are we giving them the opportunity and the platform for that? And then there's a question that we have here around accountability, right? How can we measure the progress towards your vision that can be used for accountability, which I've noticed as a theme throughout this conference, which set us off from our very opening of the conference, around unity happens through accountability, right? So I'd love to pose that to you all, whoever wants to take take this on is, what would you measure as progress towards your vision to hold folks accountable to say, we are doing this or we are not?
I mean, a further expansion of what I was saying, and it kind of connects to something Raquel said very early on about putting artists of color in the position of holding the space and supporting this sort of change, but in pointing out that the power resides with the board or the core of an institution, the accountability measures kind of have to come from that set or people adjacent to that set. People need to make their own rubric for what they think is humane and how people are treated. I mean, on the other side, we'll continue to try to represent stories that we care about. And I think people will continue to want to be involved as artists of color of any sort of marginalized identity or in general. But those that are disempowered in various ways are not always the ones that need to be doing the work to show those in power what to do to change. There has to be some sort of onus or accountability for that core. And that's really hard, right? Like, it's hard to change a group of people that have held the power for so long to care about making a change. I mean, history even provides for us that a lot of times revolutions are only won when they're co-signed by the elite. And sometimes that means that hearts have to be pricked. And sometimes that means that people have to march, people have to continue to have an outcry. But until that cry is enough or at a volume that some hearts are changed in places where people have the power to make change, that may not happen. So I'm not saying there's not one single answer to that, but I do think that the accountability measures have to be on the people that have the power to make the change. I mean, it's hard because I don't want to dissuade myself or other people that are trying to invoke that call to happen, but you can only cry out so much.
And that's a fair statement, Davóne. And so I wonder if maybe the question could be reframed so that for you all, how are you holding the industry? And I hesitate because, again, that's just like it's such a big, broad thing. But how are you as artists, right? And this is a panel of artists, singers, director. How are you as artists? How would you hold folks accountable? How would you hold the companies that you work for accountable? How would you hold the institutions who invite you in to work with them? What are ways in which you feel like you might be able to hold folks accountable to ensuring that progress is being made? Is that something you feel you can do? I'll even start with that.
Well, I mean, I spent the beginning of all the COVID lockdowns back in March, starting to look at the tax returns of these nonprofits in the US because I was confused about the inconsistency about the treatment of artists and the yeah, that's all. Just inconsistency of the treatment of the artists who they claim to love and support. And I was just sort of in shock by some of the numbers that I saw. And I couldn't really track a pattern. But I would love to see, when we're talking about the art, just getting back to this thing about what the word of opera and what that means, and the work that we're actually doing. The commitment to education feels really important, like learning, just the commitment to learning feels really important because that's the work that I feel opera has ignited in me and continues to demand of me. And so when I don't see that reflected in an organization, I'm just a little, or that's not where a majority of the resources are going, I'm a little confused. When I see it going to massive overhead or supporting just a very few number of people and allowing them to stay afloat. That I find very confusing, especially when many of these institutions want to claim that they are cultural centers of their communities. What does that mean, though, if your money doesn't reflect that? Especially as a nonprofit, right? Especially as a nonprofit. That's the structure that we've set up here. So like that's one place. And in terms of just my own projects, like for any artists who are on this call listening, I want to come into every single creative relationship that I have from a place of generosity and openness. But I also now understand there are warning signs when I'm engaging with an institution. I work very closely with several institutions, and that's how I've been able to get my work done, most of it, because of the resources that they have available, the networks they have available. They're already in place. That's great, but there can be a very quick abuse of of ideas of the artists themselves. And that took me aback, honestly. Like this year, that reality has taken me aback and has been very disillusioning. So I would like, and now I have clear guidelines for myself, and also that I just put forward as well, saying like, and this is how I would like to see this project brought to fruition. And if it's not that way, we need to have an open conversation about that. And if it cannot happen, then it's over. It's like, it's not personal. It's about how you want to get the work done. So this gets back to mission statements and values. If the values of the people who are running these institutions don't actually reflect the value of the art form itself, I guess I will just say how I value the art form itself and the values that it gives, and also even just the values that I have as a human being, I'm going to find it very hard to work within that institution. And like, how do you hold that other human being accountable? I'm not sure yet. There's public pressure you can apply. There's also working within, I don't know. I don't have, as Davóne said, there's no one prescription for any of this, because there's so many ways that all of this has gotten so convoluted, and the structures have gotten so twisted and contrived and pulled out of the hands of the people who are making the art and wanting to actually just share it, really just share it. Okay, I'll pass the talking stick.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think that's an important, the values alignment, I think, is really important in what you said, because I want to call this out, right? It's in your conversation with those institutions around the values. I think it's too easy to put up values on your website or put up values on your document about mission, vision, values, but it's very apparent very quickly when an organization or an individual embodies that value or not. When you share a vision of how something, especially as a person of color, when you share how it should be rolled out, if it's a work that speaks to your culture, how you identify, whatever that might be, and you're not being heard, right? And that is not being taken into account. That to me is a really big one of like, oh, no, you're not actually embodying the values that you say you do. We have a really robust list of questions that I hope we have some time for, but I want to give Raquel and Yuval an opportunity to chime in with anything that we've heard so far from Davóne and Julia around this issue of accountability, and from your perspectives, what you can do or what you can offer to the folks listening around that.
Well, I know that Yuval mentioned a few questions ago about thinking incredibly locally within your companies. And I think that's, we can, a lot of the time in America, we are obsessed with the European model of what opera looks like and what it should act like in your own company, when in fact, what we need to be examining for our own success, for each company's success, is what does that opera company look like at its best when it is serving its own community best. And I think what you've all said, thinking locally, is the way to head that. And I also wanted to touch on what Julia and Davóne mentioned about we as artists coming into new spaces. And to be honest, Alejandra, you asked if we felt like we could broach this topic in new companies. And quite frankly, I don't always feel like a lot of companies are safe spaces to say, hey, look at this cast. It's the cast is not at all representative of what you claim you want your audience to look like and what your community looks like. And it's often not a safe space to approach administration or even your team with how are we going into this community, that we're often strangers to, and how do we take that upon us when we're also all our careers feel at least often very fragile, and it is going back to being courageous, that there is a lot of work to be done. I can claim that I have a lot more work to be done in that realm of being courageous and stepping into new spaces and new companies and seeing the problems and feeling like I can speak up. But we do often feel as a young singer that every step, every new place you go is such a crucial step that you need for your career, and to be able to build a platform from which you can actually enact change. And Julia, I've long admired from I've known her for years, and since I've known her, she's always told stories and always been bold and brave about how she wants to step into a new space and tell the stories that need to be told. And I can't say that I feel the same boldness and bravery that she embodies, but I know that that is what needs to happen now, and that is the change that needs to happen within our own community. Because I am lucky that I have a career that looks very classic, the traditional opera career. I sing a lot of Puccini and a lot of Verdi at opera companies, but that is a space in which I am welcome and in which I am comfortable. But because not everybody is welcome and is not comfortable in that space, that means it needs to change. And the onus is on us to be part of that as well. So no, that's not really an answer to the question, but it is.
Actually, what was so cool is that you were like, I'm holding my own damn self accountable. And that, yes, that is the only reason, where my courage or boldness, and also even just ability to step back, comes from sometimes, is just like, how am I holding myself truly accountable? So thank you, Raquel. Actually, that was an amazing answer. And demanding that everyone hold themselves accountable.
Exactly what Raquel said. No, okay, I actually was going to say the same thing. I think as artists, we're used to being required to hold ourselves accountable. I'm not going to say how singers do this, but I know singers, some of them get obsessed with listening to recordings of themselves and going, oh no, I need to do that better. I need to whatever. From a directorial point of view, it's like thinking about a rehearsal the next day going, I really didn't help this scene in this way, or, that is part of our process. We're process oriented people. And so holding ourselves accountable to our own standards is something we're really used to. So I think realizing that, and Raquel, that's beautiful the way you put it, is actually just inspiring other people to also hold themselves accountable when it goes outside of the aesthetic realm and starts to become about the social and political realm that we're looking for. And I think on that topic, I just feel like, as the white guy in the room, I have to say that, I think about this a lot, how I hold myself accountable, considering the privileges that I've been given just based on how I look and how I was born. So, that is another level of accountability that I think about a lot as it relates to diversity. And if I had to frame it, I would sort of say that I think a lot about this quote by John O'Donohue, who's an amazing Irish poet and philosopher, who said, I hope I can get this right. Hold on. The responsibility of privilege is integrity. And that's something that I carry with me a lot, is just thinking about the integrity, not just my own personal integrity, but how am I making, how am I taking this position, the leadership positions that I've been given, to truly make space for other people and solidifying their integrity and allowing their integrity to shine through.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And Raquel, I want to thank you for your honesty in responding to that, because I think it's too easy for folks to say, oh, well, nobody said anything, so there must not be a problem, and not think about the positional power, to not think about, well, what is this artist or whomever thinking about when they're thinking about, can I speak up? How do I speak up? And I put that responsibility on the administration side. At Seattle Opera, we just started a practice, which is a little difficult during COVID, of as a person who's leading the implementation of our racial equity work in the company, going in on the first day of rehearsal, right? It's your traditional stuff that you go through, and then talking about, here is our commitment to racial equity, here is what we're doing, here are the people you can talk to. And then as I walked away, I thought, I'm never going to see these folks again. Granted, right now it's because we're in, it's COVID, and we're trying to limit the number of people in the space. But I'm thinking about, once we are back into much more in person, right? Like how can we ensure that we're constantly in the space so that it doesn't feel like this work is done here and that work is done there, right? And to be able to allow a space for those conversations to happen in a safe and brave way, which I think is really important for all of us to consider. And Yuval, one of your earlier points too, around this local versus global, I think it's important too for companies who may sit in areas that are predominantly white to still think about serving your local community as, what are the values that you want your community to have and to reflect, right? Because I have often heard this on the flip side of, well, there aren't that many Black or Latin folks or whatever that might be. That might be the case. There are a lot of reasons why, but is that truly what we want our community to reflect? Do we want to reflect the community who says, because they are not here, we're not going to talk or experience or really understand the cultures that are not dominant in our spaces? So I think that is part of it to me too, is when we think about locally, is what do we want our local community values to be, and are we reflective of that? We've got just a few more minutes here, and I want to get to a couple of these questions, one of which we answered, I think, in terms of what is the advice to give to artists who might see problems, and how they can address it. There are two questions regarding voice and vocal training, which I'd love to hear your responses to, and around the idea of the classically trained voice being part of the issue of centering whiteness in opera. Do you all feel that that just by the nature of the classically trained voice, that is a further I'm sorry, I'm trying to like paraphrase these two questions are about the same thing, but a little bit different. But is the classically trained voice, is this part of the problem? Is this something that needs to be fixed, that we have centered that as whiteness, and make room for changing our aesthetic understanding around that?
I feel that the way that classically trained singers, that singers have been trained in the classical performing arts, at least I can just speak to the United States because that's where I went to school, is often a perpetuation of trauma and control, and a culture of trauma and control, which is, it's like that is all influenced by colonialist practices. So ideally, the training of singing liberates the voice so that it can do anything that you can possibly imagine. There's so many ways to make sound. There's so many ways to share of your instrument. There's so many ways to embody the music that is transcribed. and you know, this is an art form right now, at least opera right now is based on transcription. You have to be a literate musician in order to create it, right? Other than a very few people who had coaches who could guide them through every single step of the way. So it's like, is that something that's important to us as well? So I think that this addressing what is going on in our quote unquote industry or in our institutions also comes all the way back to how we have started to train artists going into the field. It begins there. It begins there. The mindset of all that begins.
I think for a long time, a very long time, I've been caught in between two places. One being the music of the church that I grew up in, and the other being a white Western European classical aesthetic. And I think being caught in the middle made me do disservice to both sides. And recently, I've had more time to be with myself, be with that conflict of what am I trying to actually represent and communicate. And it's made me invest more deeply in the foundations of technique, in what does it mean to actually, you know, attune myself in a way that is about communication first, and not about trying to ape an aesthetic that has been prized or praised. I think that what Julie is talking about in terms of, you know, classical training being about the voice and its freedom and its capacity for communication, that again, I think is a beautiful and foundational way of approaching this that is actually not the onus of many institutions. I think that's the basis of where, you know, health and tools and ability to share are, but what gets put on it is some sort of end result without some line from the person to the thing. So, I mean, I've been personally appreciative of the time and space to clarify that conflict, but I also know that there are people stuck along that spectrum. You know, am I doing something because it actually connects to communication I want to make, or am I just trying to make a sound that someone told me was the right thing? You know, where is the connection and where is the humanity in that? And also not doing a disservice to my roots, not doing a disservice to the things that I actually more personally connect to, like the first most basic music making that I did, and not allowing that to be discredited or tarnished either. You know, it's yes, finding that place where you are yourself and then able to move as you choose.
Do you think that there is, we only have a couple minutes here, but this struck me as you were talking. I mean, is this yet another place of inequity and injustice where we allow, there are many great singers that we can think of, and I'm thinking of mostly the white ones, where you're like, oh yeah, horrible technique in doing X, Y, and Z, but oh my gosh, an amazing voice, a historic, right? Like this is a great thing. And yet the pressure for specifically singers of color to have to be perfect in the traditional way without allowing for these little nuanced things that create the magic of a personalized voice. Is that fair or not?
No, I mean, I can think of, you know, and I think it's a privilege too. I know we only have a couple minutes, but, and it kind of a tangent, but it'll come back, is that, you know, in the way that you curate your Instagram feed or your Facebook feed to reflect what can represent you and thus empower you. I think also young singers need to be allowed to listen to singers that look like them, whose life experiences may be more like them and who sound like them, and you know, not be forced, as both Davóne and Julia mentioned, to fit into the mold of what we've been trained that we need to sound like. And it all goes back to, you know, the prizing of the homogenous sound here, that, you know, we need to prize the uniqueness of each voice. And yeah, I agree that it's not, I don't think BIPOC singers have the opportunity to explore the nuances of their voice when you feel you need to be perfect in order to succeed a lot of the time. And perfection is not interesting, but you know, that is the mold that we've been told to follow. So, I mean, it's a conversation we can go on and on about, but yeah, I just wanted to touch on that.
Well, we will ask Sphinx to put that on to a panel for their next conference. Sadly, we are out of time and we didn't get to all the questions, but thank you, audience, for putting those in. I want to thank this amazing panel here, and I want to thank the Sphinx organization for putting together this panel, again, the first opera-specific one, and hopefully there will be many more to come, because I think even within this conversation, we unearthed a lot that we certainly want to dig into. And hopefully we've had folks walk away with a couple of things that they can take into action. Be intentional in your work and in your art making. Be accountable for your actions, and be brave enough to hold others accountable too. Any last parting thoughts before we say goodbye?
Love music. Love it a lot.
It was so great to hear from everybody and to hear everybody's brilliant minds at work, and so nice to meet Yuval and Alejandra here. So, and thank you, Sphinx, for this opportunity.
Okay.
I implore
Thank you all.
Oh, I just wanted to say I implore organizations to interrogate their mission statements or make new ones, and then hold themselves accountable to those in ways that are sometimes uncomfortable. Will be uncomfortable.
Yeah, thank you. There you go. All right. Thank you all so much.